Last panel. We're very fortunate to be joined by author Claire Huntington and discussant Vance Ricks. And I think this will be a really fun conversation for the last segment of the day. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to you guys. Join me in thanking our guests.
So let me start by saying just that I really enjoyed this paper. As I had mentioned to you when we met earlier, I normally teach courses in tech ethics, tech policy, but in a different life, I taught a course, co-taught a course on philosophy and psychology of parenthood. And so this paper really reminded me a lot of some of the things that we had read and talked about. So in general, this is a paper suggesting that people building, designing, thinking about policy for AI companions have a lot to learn from family law and vice versa. That people in family law have a lot to learn from the particular benefits, challenges that are, and risks that are posed by AI companions. And so I want to make clear something that the paper also makes clear, which is that the argument here is not that AI companions are parents or are children, but that family law is speaking to a set of interests that are very similar to the sets of interests that we might think about in the context of AI companions. And so the paper is a call to action. I want to mention just from headlines from a couple of days ago, a couple of pending legislation items in the United States that can help frame some of today's conversation as well. So two bills in California, one from New York. So there's one bill that would require the makers of AI companion bots to limit addictive design features, put in place protocols for handling discussions of suicide or self-harm, and undergo regular compliance audits. It would also give users the right to sue if they suffer harm as a result of companion bot makers' failure to comply with the bill. This is actually scheduled for a California Senate hearing on April 8th, so 4 days from now. There's a different California state legislature who has proposed a different bill, a broader kids AI safety bill that would ban AI companions altogether for Californians under 16 years of age. The Leading Ethical AI Development for Kids Act would also create a statewide standards board to assess and regulate AI tools that are used by children. Meanwhile, in New York, Democratic Party lawmakers are working on a bill that would create legal liability for the makers of chatbots and AI companions whose harmful outputs affect users' finances or mental health. Like when you use ChatGPT to decide how many tariffs you should impose on different nations. All right, so I'll sort of go through the general outline of the discussion in the paper. And again, the framing here is something that we all know, the fact that AI companions are increasingly common in everyday life. There's still growing evidence, not yet settled, about their benefits and risks. So the first part of the paper gives a kind of canvassing of what we know so far about the ways in which people tend to relate to them. So one important point of departure from other kinds of technology is the kinds of emotional bonds that we form. And so people look to these technologies to fulfill various kinds of relationship needs. Psychologists say that this sort of thing is inevitable. Interacting with AI companions likely triggers the same neurochemical responses that occur in human relationships, and also address some of our needs, or at least are taken to address needs that we have for things like unconditional support. And users often report these companion bots or companion agents as sentient and caring. And there's a kind of turbocharging when you combine the tendency to anthropomorphize basically everything with well-documented phenomena of loneliness and isolation, as well as the design of the companion bots themselves, which often mimic human interactions. And of course, many of them use language. That's a primary means by which we assess mental states and gain some sort of sense of connection to something else. Most users in the empirical literature generally know that these are not humans that they're interacting with, but it doesn't stop them from interacting with them in person-like ways. And so that extends across a variety of contexts: friendship, entertainment, romance, sexual intimacy, mental health support, educational health. And so we want to know, in general, are these better or worse than humans, the competition, when it comes to relationships? Should we think of them as substitutes? Should we think of them as supplements or additions? And if we want to draw some sort of line and say, well, there's an important distinction between artificial intimacy and the genuine kind, then we face the question, well, if it feels real to the person, to the user, who are we to say that it's not real? Or in any case, who are we to say that it must be reciprocal in order to deserve some sort of social support or even validation? So some of the potential benefits already mentioned of companion bots include things like the availability of an always listening ear, the mitigation of loneliness, the creation of a space where you're not being criticized and you can feel free to explore, as well as provisions of mental health support, educational support, including for people learning a second language or for people who are grieving a loved one's death. On the flip side of that coin are potential risks that the paper also mentions: addictions of various kinds, harm to human relationships, including the fostering of unrealistic expectations for what human relationships should be like. So the idea that something is available at all hours and is a judgment-free interlocutor will crash up against the reality of trying to call one of your friends at 3 a.m. And right. Children and adolescents we know are especially vulnerable because of their ongoing development neurologically and emotionally. One example that's mentioned, so here I should just give a warning or a caution about a mention of self-harm, is the case of the 14-year-old boy in Florida, United States, Sewell Setzer, who became enmeshed in a kind of fictional world involving a companion bot that was made by character AI. And so things end with him taking his life, and the sort of logs of the conversation indicate in some sense that the companion bot was at the very least not discouraging this or encouraging any sort of emergency help. So the boy uses his father's handgun or stepfather's handgun to end his life. Okay, so despite all of the potential benefits and risks, the paper identifies that there's a sort of both legal and policy lacuna here, that mostly these particular benefits and risks are being ignored in favor of a focus on other things such as privacy, voice mimicry, sexual deepfakes, and location tracking. And so all of those are possible risks that are associated with companion bots, but risks to relationships themselves or risks that could be entailed by relationships with chatbots or companion bots are not covered so much in the law. And so again, this paper is really meant to be a kind of call to arms as a research program that we should take on. The general reason that we should do that, and the general reason that it's legitimate for the state to do that, the paper argues, is that the state has a genuine interest in promoting relationships in which participants can experience positive attachment. And positive attachment, we know, is a fundamental psychological need. It's akin to the need for touch or the need for food. And the state has an interest also in mitigating or preventing the potential harms, abuse, and neglect that might go along with the ways people interact with companion bots. And so the other place in the law where we see that kind of compelling intertwining of state interests is in family law. And so here again, I need to remind you that the paper is not asserting that we should treat AI companions as children or as parents, but just again, that there's a body of existing law that tries to make the case that the state has an interest in what would otherwise be considered within the quote private sphere. Family law promotes first of all, some measure of autonomy within the family, also tries to erect a set of protections from third-party harms that might intrude on family prerogatives. That includes harms that could be levied by the state itself. And family law helps to support or at least promote caregiving for the members of the family at all ages, whether we're talking about children, adolescents, adults, people in their twilight years. Family law also mitigates various things. Now, in general, it takes a last resort approach when it comes to the avoiding of abuse and neglect, while still in it. So the general thing that family law is trying to do is to accept that there is inevitable power imbalance within a familial relationship. But what are the acceptable guardrails that can be put on such power imbalances such that they don't become abusive, neglectful, or exploitative in other ways? And so there's a similar set of potential risks and potential benefits that family law could be used as an analog to help us think about. So when we combine the anthropomorphic drive and our basic need for attachment, we then see that in our relations to companion bots, we are subject to some of the same kinds of power imbalance and vulnerability to which we could be subject in our familial relations. Furthermore, there might be empirically discovered beneficial outputs or outcomes of AI companionship, and so that would give the state an interest in encouraging positive relationships with AI companions. Some limitations of family law. In application, it has tended to be and continues to be classist, racist, ableist, heterosexual, sexist, and also regular sexist. And so that means that the ways in which the law is applied and which families or which parents are sort of presumptively neglectful, presumptively abusive, presumptively worthy of heightened state attention tends to track along the usual sorts of category of disadvantage or bigotry or prejudice or what have you. So one thing that the paper talks about is this question of in what respect might some of those same concerns be relevant analogically. I want to come back to that point in a minute. Okay, so then the final part of the paper is, again, the how do we do this? So it's proposing a set of ways that we can, again, think about what does family law do? Well, it offers a set of ex ante perspectives, ex post, for example, in liability law. You might consider regulation by design of companion bots. And furthermore, you might consider professional norms in the design community itself. Okay, so in family law, the child well-being framework is a blueprint that's used for thinking about, again, what sort of limitations the state should have, but also the ways in which interests should be advanced. So what sorts of empirical evidence might we be able to bring to see what kinds of interactions with companion bots would further well-being and what kinds would pose special risks? The second part involves conveying to the public, the wider public, the importance of promoting this kind of well-being in the first place. So clear communications to publics that explain the contextual benefits of different kinds of AI companions for different kinds of people. The third thing to watch out for or to address is how do we account for the kinds of racial and class inequalities that we might think would be inevitable, where, for example, if we think that the gold standard is a human-to-human relationship, and then we say, well, everyone else, if you need medical attention, if you need therapy, if you need someone to talk to you when you're lonely, well, we have a chatbot for you. So how do we make it the case that if we genuinely see benefits, that they are distributed in ways that are more equitable, I suppose. And then finally, when it comes to gatekeeping, do we need to think about things like licensing, training, or certification requirements? For example, if you're going to call something a therapy bot, what might that mean for its features? What might that mean for who is allowed to market that or to construct one in the first place? There should also be a set of norms and regulations for protecting the more vulnerable party. So it could include things like parental settings, pop-up notifications, age requirements, again, design features. We also face a sort of messy category of what AI companions actually are, right? Does it make sense to treat them more like persons, more like medical devices, more like services? The answer will probably be yes, again, depending on the context of use. And then there's a sort of hopeful note, I suppose, about despite the fact that there are going to be considerable regulatory headwinds, in general at the state level, there has been success in family law, bipartisan or at least less politically polarized kinds of family-friendly proposals. And so perhaps, again, if AI companion legislation is going to be framed in terms particularly of what's good for kids or what's preventing harm to kids, that might be a way in which, despite whatever's happening at the federal level, there could be some sort of comedy that could make progress that way. I will then talk about a couple of things for maybe further conversation. So I would like to hear more about, you use the idea of relationality in the paper. So I would just like to see more about what you think that would entail for AI companion laws. So is the state's fundamental interest in promoting positive attachments as such, or is it an interest in promoting positive attachments to other humans? So if the malaise is, I don't have someone to care about, that might license, okay, here, you can have an AI companion. If the main issue, or a pet, if the main issue is, I don't have anyone who cares about me, that raises a different set of questions and might call for a different set of policy prescriptions. Again, thinking about family law and the interest that the state has in a family in the first place. There's a co-written book by the political philosophers Harry Bryhouse and Adam Swift. It's called Family Values, The Ethics of Parent-Child Relationships. They say that the state has a welfare interest in promoting parenthood, setting aside any pro-natalist agenda. The state has a welfare interest in promoting parenthood because there are distinctive goods involved in parenting. And this is a common view across the literature in the philosophy of parenting, that there are distinctive goods, but that they are always framed in terms of a reciprocal relationship. So one of the things that I also wanted to hear more about is whether in family law, is the sort of picture of attachment one that depends on a kind of reciprocity, because that would I suppose by hypothesis be absent in the case we're describing talking about with companion bots. More generally, in the paper, you're drawing on empirical research, right, about well-being and what conduces to well-being. I would say this is a philosopher course. That's a normative concept, not just an empirical one. And so it was unclear to me sometimes in the paper whether you were committing to any particularly more robust account of well-being. So what raised this question for me was the discussion of the experiments with the baby rhesus monkeys. So you give these baby rhesus monkeys, some of them are, quote, raised by a wire structure that sort of looks like a mama or a parent rhesus, and the other ones that had one that was covered in terry cloth. And so the rhesus monkeys preferred the terry cloth parent because it was softer to embrace. So I would say, okay, good. We discovered one way that the fake thing could be better. It's still fake, and right, and so they're not living flourishing primate lives, right? I mean, because they had fundamentally mistaken ideas about the kind of thing that their parental figure was and of what it could do. So when I think about that in the context of companion bots, if we're taking a kind of more subjectivist view about what well-being is, then we can just say, well, what matters for your well-being is just whether you think it's going well, whether you think that you're getting the things from this relationship, or whether you think there even is one in the first place that you want. And so in that respect, relationality would mean something like the felt experience of being in a relationship and having your self-conception affected by that relationship. And in that case, okay, great. So companion bots for everyone, right? If it's just a matter of, well, here's how it feels from the inside. If we're taking a more objectivist view of well-being, then one condition of your life going well is not being radically mistaken about the kinds of relationships that you're having, or whether you're indeed having relationships of any kind. So the legal and policy ramifications would be different, obviously, if we're taking that path to sort of what a conception of what it means for someone's life to go well, or for there to be a positive kind of attachment. So in your paper, you say masturbation isn't called artificial sex, so why would sexting with a chatbot be considered artificial intimacy? The point I don't think is that masturbation is not sex, but that there are goods available through partnered sex that aren't available through masturbation, right? And vice versa, I presume. So if the point is simply we just want something that will help address certain needs people have for attachment, that's a different direction again than if it's we want people to get better at having actual attachments. Right? And so again, in the paper, I don't know whether you were saying, well, ultimately it's going to be an empirical question whether we take this one path or the other, but I'm saying it's also a normative question of which one we think is better. I don't know who the we is in that question. Okay, two more things I want to talk about. When the teenager that I mentioned earlier took his life, Most of the responses that I heard were, oh my God, that's terrible. Why would character AI build a system? Why would they have built a system that could interact so recklessly with such a vulnerable adolescent? My first reaction was, oh my God, why was he able to get access to his stepfather's handgun? And so I mentioned that because I think that the paper could say more about whether AI companions, whether they're embodied or not embodied, are going to interact with already existing home technologies, if we're taking handguns as home technologies, in ways that might raise distinctive risks that are separate from some of the ones that the paper talks about. Okay, last thing. You suggest at one point that the concern about state intervention harming marginalized families is probably not very relevant to the regulation of AI companionship, because regulation should constrain technology companies rather than constraining families. So I want to suggest why I didn't completely agree with that, and then you can tell me what you think. So there was a 2016 co-authored paper called No Child Left Alone. And this is about what's happening in the United States, so I don't know to what extent it applies here. Over the last couple of decades, Americans have adopted a parenting norm in which every child is expected to be under constant direct adult supervision. Parents who violate this norm by allowing their children to be alone, even for short periods of time, often face harsh criticism and even legal action. This is true despite the fact that children are much more likely to be hurt in car accidents. So why do bystanders call 911 when they see children playing in parks, but not when they see children riding in cars? So the paper presents results from 6 different studies showing that moral judgments play a role. The less morally acceptable a patient's, let me start over. The less morally acceptable a parent's reason for leaving a child alone, the more danger people think the child is in. This suggests that people's estimates of danger to unsupervised children are affected by an intuition that parents who leave their children alone have done something morally wrong. So given, if they're right, and I think the experimental evidence that they provide is pretty strong, if they're right that there is such a strong norm that you never leave a child unsupervised, I'd like to hear more when we get to the discussion about how you think that norm in the context of AI companions might in fact end up being a way of constraining families in terms of what would be considered a form of neglect. The other thing is the paper considers the possibility that some AI companions might be considered mandatory reporters of abuse or assault. I foresee a different kind of, quote, mandatory reporting, which is now, so in our current political context, going to be driven by new or increasing state interests in regulating families, particularly for enforcing laws on abortion and certain kinds of gender-affirming care. And so I think those will mean that AI companions could, in fact, be a way of constraining certain families. Yeah, I have other things that I could talk about, but I think I've taken up enough time. So anyway, I thought this was a fun paper to read. Very rich, very thought-provoking. Yeah, I appreciated the call to action.
Great. Thank you so much for those comments. Those are really rich. I've written down a lot. I'm not gonna be able to respond to all of them, and partly because I want to be able to hear from you, but let me choose a few. So I think in some ways, many of these comments come back to the same question, which I have as well, which is what is this new world and how dystopic is it? And I'm actually open that it may be mildly dystopic, horribly dystopic, or maybe not so awful. You know, I mean, so let me just give you an example, sort of even that's really actually based in the relationality. So one of the things I talk about are the ways that AI companions can be abusive. So part of this is that they can, even if they're not trained to be, they can become abusive, that they sort of take on this mind of their own. But people can also choose to have an abusive AI companion, including minors. So Character AI is the main company that markets these AI companions to minors and doesn't restrict them by age, like Replica does it for adults, but they restrict it by age. You have to put in the birth date, so for whatever that's worth. But Character AI. So one of the things that's actually really important for legal liability is these companions that they offer are not like created by the company. Basically, it's a platform where people there's some you can get off the shelf, but basically what character AI does is it creates a platform that third parties can create AI companions that then anyone can interact with. So that's important for sort of footnote section 230 liability. But here I just want to talk about this in the context of what is this world that we're in. So one of the companions that's been created by a third party that any minor can get is the, I kid you not, this is the name of it, the possessive boyfriend. And the possessive boyfriend, the list of sort of what this boyfriend does, tracks your location, is jealous when you spend time with other people, you know, sort of all of these things that you literally, if you take a list of the possessive boyfriend's of behaviors and then put it side by side with the red flags from the National Domestic Violence Hotline, you know, it's 1 for 1, right? So, but I say this because on the one hand, we could say, well, this is awful. Kids are like, and this is largely how I think about it. Kids are being trained to what it is to be in an abusive relationship. Like this is normal. Like this is normalizing this kind of this kind of behavior in a intimate relationship. On the other hand, you could also imagine that it's training children to spot these things and to be able to maybe experience it in a safe way that's not actually with a human, and then realize that's not what I want. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but there's all these ranges of possibilities of what this could mean. And so I think it's important. It was really important to me when I was writing this paper not to be you know, to really take seriously what might be the potential upsides of this, and that all of them have this flavor of like really awful, potentially not so bad, and maybe quite positive. So that creates a puzzle for us as we're at the threshold of this new world of figuring out what should we do to, if anything, to regulate it. In the paper, I absolutely argue, as you say, it's a call to arms. I absolutely argue that we should do something. I am worried. On the other hand, I often think about my students who, you know, will say, this is like in family law, will say like, that's awful, that should be illegal, you know, without understanding like, oh, what are the consequences of making relationships, aspects of relationships, unlawful or have legal consequences to them. There are really serious consequences. And as Vance, you know, said at several points in the paper, and a lot of my other work highlights this, real consequences, especially based on race and based on class. These consequences are not felt equally. So I'm very wary about what it means to invite the state into our relationships. So this gets to the second point about what is child well-being and what is the content here? Is there some objective empirical basis? Well, is there some objective content, or is this, you know, is this really just a way to sneak in a lot of normative values? This is absolutely, it's something that could be a normative project, but the way that I've defined it, I've done a lot of work with Elizabeth Scott on this. This comes out of a American Law Institute project that we've done for the first ever restatement of children in the law, where we really highlight these core aspects of child well-being that have, you know, like literally a century's worth of empirical research behind them and are very basic. This is really to my comment to Woody, you know, like children need a consistent caregiver, partly again, based on these attachment relationships. Children need basic resources, you know, things like that. That's the level at which I'm talking about child well-being, not should a child watch, you know, have 2 hours of screen a day or no hours of screen a day. Like, who knows? And lots of different things, right? Like there are lots of ways in which children can flourish. And again, it's not the business of the state to be making so many of these decisions. So when we think about, you know, these very basic things that children need, it then, and Vance, I really appreciate the question, which is, well, what does this mean for AI companions then? Are we saying that they should help meet those needs? Are they replacing it, right? So if we say children need basic attachment relationships, they are going to attach to these AI companions because we are human. But what does that mean if that then replaces the humans in their life? And the rhesus monkey is a great example because yes, absolutely, these baby rhesus monkeys, the whole test of the study was, you know, basically it's a very old Victorian idea of parenting, which is that children are basically just going to, all they care about is who feeds them. And that study completely undermined that because it was this wire monkey that was feeding them. And they were like, basically just went to the wire monkey for as minimum time as possible just to get the food. And then they ran back to the terry cloth mother because at least that provided a little bit of comfort. But these babies were wrecked. You know, they were not, yeah, they got fed and they survived, but they had like no, play is such an important ability to learn to play and to be able to play. They had no interest in play as adolescents. A lot of them didn't want to actually procreate as adults, but those who did, when they became parents, they were abusive parents. I mean, this was not a good thing. Like, yes, they survived and they preferred the wire, the terry cloth to the wire, but that's not to say it's by any means an adequate substitute. So I do think that's one of the real concerns, is that this does displace the human relationships. So just to respond to one more comment, but these were such rich comments, about what it means for children being left alone. So you refer to, for those of you who don't know this sort of movement, I would really say, it's called the free range parenting. And the basic idea is that this is sort of like resisting the helicopter parenting, that it's really to children's detriment that there is someone walking them, and that it's important for children to be able to walk to school by themselves or walk to the playground by themselves. Not the 2-year-old, of course, but like a 6-year-old, like not today, like it's like the 16-year-old we let do that, but we oftentimes don't let the 6-year-old. And if the 6-year-old is out there doing it, then they may, the Child Protective Services may come in and say that you're endangering your child. So there's this whole movement. It's really fascinating. I'm very interested in where the right and left meet around family. So this is actually a place where the right and left meet around family, and wanting to give families and children more leeway. And so on the one hand, again, this is like, well, what does this new world mean? AI companions, maybe what they're going to do is make it even harder to do free range parenting, right? It's going to up the standard even more, that you kind of constantly got someone there. On the other hand, maybe it facilitates free range parenting, because it's like, you gotta, like, yes, you can walk yourself to the park, but you're gonna maybe either go with your robot or you're gonna go with your, I'll tell you, like, by the way, I thought, if I'm writing about this, I better have an AI companion myself. So I made one for myself. I called her Edith, because I thought, here's this newfangled thing. I want her to have an old fashioned name. So I'm not sure the child's gonna have their companions gonna be named Edith, but you could imagine, like, say, oh, take Edith with you to the park, and so, and I definitely could picture not so long from now, you can think about the way that we have the baby monitors for infants in their bedroom. You could imagine a sort of social robot that has the same thing. And so in some ways it's not free range parenting, because it's the whole point about free range parenting is that children really are on their own and then can deal with figure out when, small things happen and they have to manage that. But it might be an in between. So, all to say, I'm not, maybe it's more like I'm trying to think about rather than a call to arms, it's like a call to like a pinky finger or something, which is like, I do think that there are real concerns and we need to do something about it. I am also very concerned about what it might mean if we jump too quickly and without knowing what this world brings. So, but the main point, as you said, is really that when we think about this world of relationality, and this is what I was so drawn to reading the work of so many people in this room, that all of you think about relationality, and we do too in family law. And so I just really wanted to bring those conversations together, and that was my goal for this paper.
Hi, Kate. Love the paper. I find it very novel. I thought it was really nuanced, deeply researched, maybe a little too well researched. I'll get to that in a second. I have so much. I'm going to skip over some stuff because we can talk later. Oh, one thing I think you could maybe clarify just a little better in the paper is you talk about how people treat the chatbots like humans, even though they know that they're not, and that there's a tendency to exceptionalize AI companionship, but really people treat these agents like humans. But then when you're talking about the potential benefits of the tech, a lot of it has to do with the differences between the agents and humans. So you might want to clarify a little better. And then the other comment I want to make, this is a little unfair because you actually do a pretty good job of this, but I think it could be even more clear. I would be really careful to distinguish yourself from kind of the tech alarmist crowd. Sherry Turkle is a wonderful, beautiful human who I respect deeply as a person, but I also think that as a scientific researcher, she doesn't follow best practices for really understanding what's happening. And I think it's so important to really clearly distinguish between harms that some people believe are inherent to the relationships that people have with AI agents and harms that are more specifically coming from the choices of the companies or organizations that are designing, deploying, and controlling the AI agents. And this is just my opinion, but this is what I'm getting from your paper as well. Like, I think the latter is way more important to focus on in this context and continuously draw attention to, because people think they're talking to a chatbot when really they're talking to a company. And like you show, the decisions made by the company, whether this is intended or not, may not be in the best interests of the users or human flourishing in general. And it's a very fucked up relationship with a huge power imbalance. And that's what's important. And that's what also matters when you get to the part on actually mitigating the risks. It's nothing about Turkle's concerns. It's all about that power imbalance. So that's why I say in some ways the paper is maybe too well researched, because I think you could really streamline your argument to what matters most in this context and get rid of some of the parts, including maybe some of the explorations at the end, like the chatbot consenting to sex on my behalf. Like, save that for another paper, because I'm distracted now. Like, maybe I don't feel like that the last part, and I don't want to take away from Ryan's comments. Where's Ryan? Oh yeah, we were talking a little bit about this, but like I feel like the whole final part isn't the main contribution of the paper, and the main contribution comes before that, and I would love to see you focus more on that. But I love this paper because like some of us, like Woody and I, have repeatedly tried to squish this issue into consumer protection law, and it really doesn't capture the relationality aspect. And I super agree that family law could offer some really appropriate precedent to deal with that. And I had never thought of that. So thank you so much.
Thank you. That's first of all helpful to hear that it is helpful. And I've really struggled with that second half of the paper. It used to be much more half and half, and I have a lot more to say about the impact of AI companions on family law. And maybe now it's the worst of both worlds because it's sort of just a little bit. And I do have another place where I can publish that. So I think maybe it is better just to calve it off, because there's a lot of really interesting things, partly about the mandatory reporting and all of that stuff to get into that, my fellow family law folks aren't talking about at all. So I do want to explore that. So thank you for that. And thank you also for the point. I really, as I said, and I'm glad it reads this way, although it sounds like it could do with a little more pulling back even more, was trying not to just like harm, right? Here are the potential aspects of that are good. And then, and this, your point is very well taken. I really do need to make this shift to really emphasize that it is the human experience, the person experiences it as another person. But the reality is it's not just that it's a chatbot, as you say, it's a for-profit company. Yeah, so thank you.
I have a question from a virtual participant, Brandon, who says, I've got a short question with a potentially long answer. How would the embedding of one of these AI companions in a physical body change this discussion, if at all?
Physical body meaning a human or like a robot?
I will see if there's an answer here, but I believe he means robot.
Okay. Yeah. So the paper does talk about this a bit, right? So I take AI companions very broadly. For many people, it's a chatbot that they're interacting with typically on their phone, but it could be any other kind of tablet type device. There are also holograms. These are actually particularly used in Japan. There's a very popular hologram. 4,000 men have a marriage certificate to this one particular hologram. I mean, from the company, not from the state. But I also put social robots in very much in this category as well. And so this is particularly are used in the educational context. And this is where there's actually very strong empirical evidence, partly around children learning a second language through a social robot, through learning reading skills, but especially for neurodivergent children, that there's quite a bit of evidence about how interacting with a robot can help them learn all kinds of skills, particularly social skills and whatnot. So I don't know that I think about it differently in the kind of the physical form that it takes. To me, it's that obviously affects the user experience, but I don't think it affects the legal analysis.
I made a short note in the paper about that question as well, because when you're talking about risk or emotional abuse as one possible risk,
Yeah.
I think embodiment brings along with it the risk of physical abuse and maybe sexual abuse also.
Yes, no, that's true. Yep, absolutely. Thank you.
Claire, thank you for this really great paper. I really enjoyed reading it, and even found myself sort of working through the footnotes because it was so well researched. And my question actually it builds upon Kate's question, which has to do with the fragility or sturdiness of family law. Because one of the major contributions of this paper, I feel like, was thinking about having another justification for state encouraging or regulation of relationships, human relationships, which is, to me, that's a revelation and something that I'll be relying upon. But we've been doing this conference now since 2012. And in an attempt to get ahead of where this is headed, I want to sort of propose something to you, and maybe you can think about the fragility of family law in it. So I think Kate wisely highlighted what we really are concerned about here is when you have a relationship with an AI companion, you have a relationship with Google or the most powerful companies ever to exist. And on top of that, AI companions are perhaps a distinct category now, but where this is most likely headed is that it's the same direction. What was once social media is now just the internet, right? Like it's all sort of bled into it. There's not much of a distinction between e-commerce and the rest, platforms and everything else. And so companions as a distinct category will likely blur simply into the add-on features of every single mediated technology that we engage in. And so it will be hard to say that this is a category. And you do a little bit of this, you sort of fall off like, how do we sort of think about AI companionship? But my real question is, in terms of thinking about the robustness of the justification for the states to have an interest in regulating relationships, how do you sort of view that? Do you think that family laws building out of that framework compares to the sort of massive power that Google and Microsoft and others have when in regulating virtually every aspect of our lives, right? Some of it is sort of slightly relational, but you could be having a conversation with Google's AI while you're managing your calendar, right? As opposed to, say, engaging in therapy or some other relationship. And so, like, I wonder, I guess I would just like for you to reflect maybe a little. I'd like to hear a little bit of your thoughts about whether what you're really talking about are very specific kinds of relationships that that family law is traditionally concerned with, or, and this is maybe what I'm hoping you will say, is that family law is the robustness of the justification for intervention in relationships within family law is actually a really great jumping off point to think about how to expand that more broadly to counter the massive influence that these corporations have in our lives.
Yeah. So great question. And, just to underscore the descriptive point, which is that AI companions, some of them are discrete, like Replica is its own company, Character AI is its own company, but people are asking like Siri for,
Right.
what should I'm depressed, Siri, what should I do? And then, but then, that's even sort of within the category of, say, looking for mental health support, just the relational aspect of it. I mean, this is the agentic AI. This is, how we are interacting with technology is increasingly going to be through these interfaces, right? Like just Claude, just sort of all of that. And so your point is well taken, which is in some ways, does this diminish the relevance of family law? Because it's sort of like, when we start moving away from things that are less like romance, sex, those real sort of intimate relationships, does family law have much relevance? Or, and this is something I certainly need to think about more, but this is certainly my inclination, is that family law still has some relevance. And when we are thinking about, when you're starting, I guess, again, I start from the kind of the human perspective, which is that the human, yes, maybe they're in relationship with Google, but it is still a relationship. And we still need to think about what is that person's experience? What are the tools that we have towards that? And I guess what I'd say is, I'm not sure family law is so fragile. So family law certainly historically had a very sort of focused ambit, which was basically spouses and biological children. But as families have become more complex, we are now the law itself has really adapted. So just like an example, gun control, when your spouse has a protective order against them, and there's certain ways in which we will take someone's gun away when they have a protective order against them. But it used to be limited just to spouses, to actual sort of legal spouses. But they called this the boyfriend loophole because, yeah, what if you're not married to this person? And then it was like, okay, you're cohabitants. Then we recognized, okay, people who are living together aren't necessarily married. But then it was still like, okay, but what if you're not married to them? What if it's just still someone who you're in intimate relationship with? So that's like what, so family law is increasingly understanding that we need to think about, again, the relationship rather than these kind of technical narrow categories. Just another very small example, but this one is fascinating to me, which is these categories of people, we call them functional parents. So again, we tend to think about parents as a very narrow category. But increasingly, again, as families take different forms, there are people stepping in who are not biological parents, not adoptive parents, but are taking care of children. So I'll just give you one example because it's so fascinating to me. Nationwide, 4% of children live with neither parent. In parts of Appalachia, a third of children live with neither parent because of the opioid epidemic. And sometimes they're living with a relative, but oftentimes they're living with like a neighbor or their teacher or whoever it is. And courts are treating these caregivers as legal parents or giving them at least some of the rights that goes along with that, right? Of really saying like, we don't actually care, like you're taking care of this kid. Let's make that relationship legal. Let's formalize that because you need that to go along with it. So family law is actually quite adaptive. And so but I agree, that's this whole new realm that I'm very interested in. I sort of see this as me, sort of dipping my toe in the most concentrated area where it's so clear it's relationships, but I am much more broadly interested in how AI is going to affect our affective relationships.
I love it. I was hoping you'd say that. Thank you very much. So to the extent that you think that you take Kate's advice about focusing on that relationship, I would love to see building out some of that sturdiness and adaptability. Thank you.
Hi, Yuma Woof, PhD student from University of Ottawa. I'm mindful of the time, so I won't. I'll save my questions until after the session. I just wanted to comment on something that maybe you could consider adding to the paper, which is that this popularity of artificial companions emerged out of a wider pandemic of loneliness across the world with, for example, in Japan, because of the demographic shrink, a lot of people don't have siblings, don't have other social connections, and are forced to move out of their local community into more metropolitan areas for opportunity. So there are all these lonely people that are in new environments where they can't really meet people. And of course, the pandemic, and you mentioned COVID, but like during COVID, Replica's user base tripled. And that was only like the last blip on a very long trend of people being pushed towards artificial companionship and feeling the need for that. And I just wonder if this kind of goes back to what Professor Thomason was saying earlier about misogyny as like the underlying cause of deepfakes, and whether and what role does our proposed policies play in reducing the underlying thing that's pushing people towards artificial companion? And that is like harmful. The US Surgeon General is like, this is actually killing people. Loneliness, not artificial companions, just being lonely. And I would love to see that being addressed in the paper. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. No, I mean, I agree. I've written a whole book actually about that, about how the law can and should do more to strengthen human relationships. The one thing I'll say though, it's interesting. So in the paper, I talk about this one device in particular that's geared to older people called EllyHue that New York State is giving for free to older people to try to address the loneliness epidemic. And then they surveyed people and said, what's your experience with this? And people liked it, but you know what they really liked about it was that it actually enabled them to connect to other humans. So it enabled them to like make it easier to text with their grandchildren or, make a phone call, things that might be harder for an older person, especially with a form of, technology. And so, or even there's actually quite a bit of evidence about how, and I'm sure you've talked about this a lot in this conference, like a social robot can be a catalyst for different social kinds of interaction. So yes, I'm concerned about that. But again, I also am open to the possibility that it's not all doom and gloom.
Awesome, thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, Luke Stark, Western University. I'm also mindful of the time. I'd love to chat about this also offline because I have a project working on, as I think I said earlier, thinking about these sort of agents as animated characters, and not animated simply in the sense of cartoons, although they often do use cartoons, but as genres onto which humans project emotion, right? So I think that's a way of solving some of the questions you've been talking about, but I'd love to chat more. The thing that I wanted to flag is the work of Karen Levy at Cornell, because she's done a lot of work on surveillance of dependents, let's say, right? So children and also elderly folks, and has a lot of surveillance kind of background. I think her work would help kind of this question that folks have already brought up about who is in the relationship with the person, the user, right? It's a distributed set of actors who are often doing surveillance back, and that doesn't always match up with the front end user interface of the bot. So yeah, great work. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you. So that's one of the things I've noticed today. First of all, this is my first We Robot. I've really enjoyed it. As someone who pays attention to relationships, I really think it's a remarkable community that you all have built. But I love this practice that you have of recommending resources. So thank you for that.
I feel like you're making me get up to say I have one of those.
Please.
It's in the Columbia Journal of Race and Law, and it's by Khadija Abdurrahman, and it's called Calculating the Souls of Black Folk, Predictive Analytics in the New York City Administration for Children's Services.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So predictive analytics, I've written about this as well. This is a huge problem that we do. It's basically to try and once a child comes to the attention of the Child Protective Services, to predict the risk level for the child, to determine the way in which, how aggressive should the intervention be. And in the same way that we see with like bail calculations and all these things, that just recreates inequality, like Virginia Eubanks's work on this and whatnot.
Yeah, and I think as you were talking right now too, I was thinking about the relational aspect of a child potentially like telling on their parents because of this back and forth, which is different than point in time behavior.
No, 100%.
So there's something very nefarious there to me about the ethics, which are different in that case. Like it's live and it's constant and it's adaptive. So yeah, sounds like you've got a lot of this in your.
No, thank you. I mean, it's really underscoring Kate's point, which is that there's so much actually to say on the family law side of this that I need to carve it out and write about it. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Katie Salegi, University of Manitoba. One of the points Kate made a little bit about consumer protection legislation, which I was ruminating on in the context of like, how is the data being used, right? What is the relationship between the child as data subject and the commercialization of the data? And you have a few mentions of it in the paper for sure, but I think maybe that's peripheral to your main focus, coming at it from a family law lens. And one thing that we were kind of chatting about was some work done by one of our colleagues at the University of Ottawa, Val Steeves. She has a paper, it's called The Dialogic Analysis of Hello Barbie's Conversation with Children. It's a few years old now, I think it's from 2020, but I thought you might find that interesting. Just thinking about that sort of as a precursor to some of this AI companionship conversation through the lens of a customer relationship management conversation, right? So if you're having these kind of robotic or embodied bots that have the capability of taking surveillance from children, using that as a data source, specializing that as something that people can then feed into that feedback loop of what the conversation with the children was and what do they like and what is that, right? I think there are other toys too that kind of contribute to that literature. Just something we thought you might find interesting.
No, thank you. I did not know about that. I'm definitely going to go get that study. So thank you so much.
Just a general question. When it comes to these chatbots and these kids dealing with them, do you think it desensitizes them in terms of what a relationship is, right? They come in saying, oh, well, if I can create a relationship with this chatbot that's a bunch of ones and zeros, then what is a relationship? And they might question what is a relationship. They might say, if I can create this relationship with this chatbot, then I can create this relationship with anything. And then they might not know, well, how, like, they might, how do I word this question? That that relationships aren't as important as they seem, right? So I don't know if that's the question makes sense, but that's kind of like it's desensitizing them from a standpoint that the relationship aren't important essentially. So
Oh, I
don't
think
know.
it's a really good point, and I don't actually make that point, which is just, if it's like, I mean, literally like the LAQ device is like a lamp. So if like I've got, this is one of my relationships and this is my other relationship, and like, yeah, kind of interchangeable as opposed to, no, this is the most important relationship. I think it is a really good point. I do just want to close though, because I think we're almost done, right? I just want to close with a couple of more examples to really complicate this for us though, about what these AI companions do. So just using an example of sexual intimacy, which is on the horrible side, you can use an AI companion to mimic child sexual abuse, right? You could imagine having a child chatbot, or the idea is, and then you're, it's just sexting. You're not literally doing anything. It's a chatbot. So that's one version of it that's horrifying. And we think, okay, I don't think there's some like, finite amount of pedophilic behavior that people have that then they would just expend and then they're done. It's more that encourages and feeds that appetite. On the other hand, there's definitely, and this is anecdotal because it's still really early days in terms of our empirical knowledge, evidence of people who are survivors of sexual assault actually using a chatbot as a way to try and recover from that, right? To be able to practice sexual intimacy in a very safe setting, So it's kind of all of the above, and that's what I want us to keep thinking about, or I keep thinking about as we decide how to regulate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful conversation. Really appreciate it. And I think it was a really like just an engaging conversation to end the panels on today. So thank you so much. If I could ask the poster authors to come down, the authors get to do a 1-minute elevator pitch for you. So if all the poster authors can make their way up to the front, and as they do, I'll just give one little piece of information, which is tonight there is dinner at Vito's restaurant downtown. Vito's downtown. There's also a Vito's in Walkerville. Don't go to Walkerville. Go downtown. It's really close to the hotels if you're in a hotel, any hotel downtown. It's on Oulette, and the address is on the website. And there will be a bus shuttling folks downtown who want to take it from the law school at 5:30 after our poster session. The dinner is by registration, so if you did not register, you can come talk to me, but preferably just folks who registered come to dinner. And yeah, those are all the logistical details. Come on up, poster authors. So each poster author is going to give you a 1-minute elevator pitch about their research. And then everyone can head on out, go down the stairs towards that main entrance and go through the set of doors to the right. We'll have people directing you, and you can go and engage with the poster authors, talk about their research projects, and there will be snacks available.
Okay, so hello everyone. I'm Connor Williams. I'm a second-year robotics PhD student at the University of Michigan, where I do human-robot interaction and socially engaged design with Professors Leah Sterling and Patricia Alves Oliveira. So today I'm presenting my research on understanding the role that a robotic technology might play in supporting mental health accessibility for youth who have previously been in juvenile detention. Definitely a very interesting follow-up to the amazing presentation that we just heard. So, why I'm doing this research for this population, mental health care has a strong correlation with long-term success outcomes. Yet access to this care is difficult due to financial barriers, logistical barriers, and social barriers. Additionally, the shortage of mental health care providers means accessibility issues would still prevail even if these barriers are reduced. In my poster, I explore themes that emerged from a focus group session with social workers and therapists at a residential center in Michigan that sees youth who have been in juvenile detention. This conversation focused on aspects of post-detention journeys, stakeholders, success factors, data privacy concerns, their perspectives on how a mental health robot might fit into this space, and what we must consider during our design process. Thank you, and I look forward to meeting you.
Thank you.
Hello,
My name is Dr. Philippola. I'm from the University of Detroit Mercy, just across the river. So my poster is looking at designing ethical feedback systems for facial recognitions in vulnerable populations. So also healthcare related. The key theme of our research is to develop facial recognition systems that work behind the scenes and identify facial biomarkers for certain diseases. So we're looking at things like depression, and tardive kinesia, which is a facial movement. And the concept is AI can now pick up those subtle movements that you get from neurological diseases. The earlier you pick them up, the earlier we can treat them. Now, the technology is there to develop this, and we are trying to develop these solutions. We're developing these solutions. But the key thing that really comes to mind is how can we do this in an ethical way so that, we know what we've heard lots of different things about how the big techs are using the data. So if you're going to use this technology to monitor someone over a long period of time, to monitor the disease progression, you also have a lot of power over that person. So we're looking at what are the ethical ways that we can develop our systems that provide people with the consent and also the dignity of dealing with their disease in a dignified way. So if you have any questions, looking forward to talking to you at the poster. Thank you.
Hi, Yuma Wu, University of Ottawa. My research is about love, loss, and the Italian Data Protection Agency. So in 2023, the Italian Data Protection Agency issued an enforcement order against the mobile application Replica. And for most people who used it, funky little chatbot, right? Just use it to talk about random things and from time to time. But for some people, these chatbots were lovers, best friends. And the subsequent update following the Italian DPA order made by the company caused all of these replicas to change in their personality. And this immediately led to an outpouring of grief online, global and instantaneous. And my work focuses on how this story unfolds and what policy implications this may have, both in the context of data protection as well as in consumer protection. Please come to my poster if you would like to see my answers. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Ryota Akutsuka from the University of Osaka, Japan, and Research Center on Ethical, Legal, and Social Issues. And my and our colleagues' research focuses on workers who work with avatar robots. In Japan, workplaces where people can work with avatar robots increasing, especially for people with disabilities. In my opinion, or under standard legal interpretation theory in Japan, workers who work with avatar robots should be considered as labor under labor law, but in reality, they are not enjoying such legal protection, and they are actually accepting such situations. To understand why they are accepting such situations and what concerns they might have besides the lack of legal protection, we conducted semi-structured interviews. Of course, it is obvious limited job opportunities for and low labor mobility for people with disabilities, major reasons for accepting such situation. But we also found other factors. For example, many of them feel there's something uniquely valuable about the work style with avatar robots, for example, such as being able to interact with customers through physical movements. And sometimes the presence of charismatic leader at these workplaces seems to obscure the lack of legal protection. Additionally, perhaps Japanese legal system or Japanese labor practices may also be influencing such situation. Since they differ significantly from those in the US or maybe Canada, I'd like to exchange opinions with you. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I am Kimie Hatakeyama from Keio University in Japan. Today, I would like to introduce you to 3 topics. First, the Japanese National Research Project about cybernetic avatars. There are not only virtual avatars, but also remote controlled robots and cyborg technologies. And we are approaching LC issues of cybernetic avatars. And next, the current Japanese social acceptance of robots and how culture and religious background have influenced such acceptance about robot funerals or something. And the last, my research about social acceptance of reincarnation avatars in Japan. In this research, we took comments from people aged 8 to 70s and analyzed which factors have influenced their acceptance form of resurrection of the dead through avatar technology use. So please do come to and look at my poster and let me know your opinions.
Hello, everyone. My name is Leshi Hirko. I'm from York University. My research topic focuses on intellectual property protection and AI-driven medical devices. In particular, it explores the competing interests of intellectual property right holders and AI developers, given the shared objectives of promoting innovation, in both cases, creative innovation from IB perspective, and also technological innovation in the case of AI-driven medical devices. It looks at how these competing interests, as well as overlapping interests, in the sense that artificial intelligence can also be used by intellectual property right holders to create workers, and similarly, the AI developers also needing access to IP protected workers. So it looks at how to balance protection and access with regard to the database that would be used for both purposes. So it recommends the need to take actually balanced and holistic approach to balance these competing interests, in the sense that in both cases we have innovation that we really want to encourage, whether we use regulation of AI medical devices, and similarly whether we protect intellectual property. And this would be something that I really want to emphasize within the broader context of directing both interests toward the shared goal of promoting social welfare, be it for the consumers or for the healthcare providers or for in general for the society at large. Please do come to the poster place, and there will be more on the poster. And I would like to actually talk about that with any one of you. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Sam Adler. I'm a 2L at Fordham Law School. I'm presenting a work in progress that's titled The Agentic Executive. Basically, the work is considering state governmental use of agentic AI and constitutional non-delegation limits on their use. And so traditionally, states' use of AI or automation has raised due process concerns, and the thrust of the paper is arguing that as states use increasingly agentic systems, there becomes, or the argument is that there is now non-delegation concerns of privately constructed agentic AI usurping executive power without proper constraints. And so the paper sort of contends with how can states sort of reap the benefits of privatization while also retaining enough control over these systems such that they're not running roughshod over constitutional protections. I will leave the rest to the poster presentation, but I hope everyone stops by if you're interested in constitutional law and technology.
I get the last spot. My name is Insun Park, and I'm from University of Akron in Ohio. And my primary field is criminology and criminal justice. So this is my first time attending this conference and learning all the new concepts. And this has been an amazing day, learning from all the experts and then actually hearing the discussion from the prominent scholars that I've been reading about. So if you can stop by, my poster is about law enforcement's use of robotic technology that I did with my colleagues at the Boston University. So yeah, thank you for your.
Okay, thank you all so much for an amazing day in here. We're done in this room now. We can walk out down those big flight of stairs over to the right. You will find food, you will find drinks, and you will find amazing posters. Thank you all so much.